Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Great to see so many familiar faces here in the room and so many familiar names online. So for those of you unaware, we are blended with this. So we have folks joining us in Zoom and folks here in the room. So we'll have that conversation going back and forth. With that, I would like to introduce Leslie from New York Historical and let her take this away.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. I am so excited to be here. I came to a realization that I have been in the museum education space almost 18 years, which is terrifying to say. And I think I can count on definitely one hand, probably on just a couple of fingers, the number of times I've had an opportunity to talk to my peers. I feel like I do conferences all the time and it's teachers and I'm like, we have great stuff, use our stuff, use our stuff. And I do have flyers if anyone would like to take one, but I'm hoping that this is actually an opportunity to talk about teacher leadership, talk about what we do at New York Historical Society, and also give you all time to talk to each other because I know that I have as much to learn from you as you may learn from me in this entire experience. And to those of you on Zoom, there will be questions, you can self-reflect, you can use the chat, and we will do our very best to incorporate you into the work. So a little bit about me and where I come from. I'm from New York Historical Society. If you aren't familiar with us, our next door neighbors are the Natural History Museum with the giant blue whale, the dinosaurs, or Central Park, probably two things you have heard of. One common misconception about New York Historical Society is that we are not actually a New York history institution. Our founding was just after the founding of this country. Our collections are national, and we are charged with telling a national story. We very often can't help ourselves and veer into New York, but unlike some of the other institutions in New York City, we think nationally. And so we're very excited anytime we have an opportunity to talk to who we think are our peers, which are American history institutions. So why am I here today? I had the opportunity to come last year to this conference. It was such a reinvigorating opportunity for me. It was the first time I was in a conference space since the pandemic. And again, it was the first time I had ever been in a space where I was surrounded by other people that cared deeply about professional development in American history, which is my jam. I now oversee all of our programs as the VP for education, but for the first 15 years of my career, I was just a practitioner in teacher training. So I'm so excited to be here. I am also very grateful to the RevEd folks for accepting this proposal and this idea. Because what you will find in this session is what I'm really passionate about is thinking about how do we create programs that allow us to address the content in the ways that we want. There are people in this room and in this building that can speak so much better to how we should talk about American history, the vocabulary, the language, a lot of the things that we were talking about at breakfast. Certainly in New York Historical, we have lots of thoughts about that, and we'll get into that a little bit. But I wanted to create a space where we could think again about the nuts and bolts as practitioners. How do we actually do this? How do we create bridges from the fabulous scholars that we work with and the curators and the librarians and the archivists and the museum educators and the teachers? And if we don't have good programs, then we're just sort of talking at each other and there's no change happening. So fair warning, we're a very practical person. There are going to be practical elements to this. And it's going to be a chance again to talk and brainstorm. And if you want to get, at any point, if you want to get into how do you talk about the history with teachers from all over the country? What vocabulary to use? I can talk about that for days. We can talk about it at lunch, or we can find time in this session to talk about that too. So if I'm too content light, push back and we can get into it. But last thing I want to say before I move on into the deep stuff is the real reason that I proposed this session was that at the end of the conference last year, Sarah Jenks, who I think is actually in this room, gave an endnote, which I thought was sort of the perfect example of why it's so great to be in a room full of professional development people as they do great professional development. And Sarah said, I came up with an endnote based on everything that I had heard. This is not a pre-prepared speech. And at the very end of it, one of the things that Sarah said is the thing I'm hearing in the room is that we need more opportunities for teacher leadership. And as someone that had just started running a teacher leader program at their institution, I thought, oh man, I want to come back next year and talk about it. And then when the proposals came out, I emailed Mark and I was like, can I do that? Like, can I suggest this? Because Sarah suggested it at the end, and I really want to continue the conversation. And that was where this idea came from. Because it seemed like all of us, many of us, were well versed in how to do workshops and how to do institutes and all of that. And I love that. That's my jam. But it seemed like many of us were in the starting phases of teacher leader programs. And I thought, why not dive into it? So what do I mean by teacher leadership? In New York Historical, we take a pretty broad definition. In many ways, I often think of us as diving into something that is much more official in teacher realms. I know in New York City, there are official titles of teacher leaders. You could get into what that looks like in a school. But for us, we think about it as opportunities for teachers to have an influence beyond their classrooms. And I think selfishly, and we'll get into this, in museums, it often translates to how do we get teachers to do things for us that we need to do? How do we get teachers to do things for us that maybe we don't feel equipped to do, or that it would look better because of funder? I don't know if any of you do N-YHS institutes, but you always have to have a teacher in the group, and the number of times we've tried to figure out how to make that work. Not because I don't love teachers, but it sort of gets this idea of like, how do I use teachers, which is like a very cynical way, but it's sort of part of my spiel today, a part of the workshop is thinking about maybe how do we get beyond that more cynical side to this more authentic piece of allowing teachers to have an influence beyond their classroom. I'm going to stop talking for a moment and get a feel for who's in the room. So raise your hand if you, like me, are coming from a museum or a historic site or an archive and you do education work, teacher work, something of that nature. That was the percentage I expected to see. Do you have any classroom teachers? I'm trying not to pick on just the four of you, and we're going to create you as a group at some point so you can talk to each other and not just listen to us. Are there folks that fall in what I might think of as another category, consultants, scholars, faculty? Great, we might actually be able to do the brainstorming I had envisioned. Does anyone want to share perhaps a 30-second description of a teacher leader program that they have either been in or that they currently run at their institutions? I'm going to talk about what we do in New York Historical, but we are not the be-all end-all answer by any means. So anything come to mind as something that you're already doing that engages teachers, or teachers that are meant to be done something like this, where it's not just training, but like working on behalf of the institution?
We're getting ready, and I'm Christy Norris with UNC Chapel Hill, North Carolina, working with the A250 team to take some of our funding and start the A250 Freedom Teaching Fellows. And so we're going to build a year-long program for teachers from each region of our state. They had initially wanted an advisory committee, and as a former teacher, I said, okay, but what are you going to do with them? It's going to be symbiotic, and it's not just they show up and you're like, I don't know what to do with them. And so we're trying to build out this program where they visit historic sites and have kind of immersive experiences where they get some content knowledge and engagement with scholars and authors, but then they're also giving historic sites some advice on, you know, this works, this doesn't, ideas. So I guess I'm right at the apex of planning that. And so I'm hoping to do it in a way that is fulfilling for both sides, not just a photo op for the governor kind of thing, and make it really meaningful so that everybody gets something that they go back.
Amazing. I feel like I should just hand this off to you.
No,
Other thoughts, other examples?
Can I just say that this also, if you're online, write it in the chat and we'll share.
So certainly, oh, I saw a hand.
Yeah, I was kind of trying to think of the range of if this fits in with the definition.
I'm sure, yes.
We have great connections with teachers that have come from our teacher professional development engagement, but created awesome year-long advisory groups where we have resources where if we have new projects, like right now I'm at Monticello and we're getting ready to update our visitor center as part of our sort of 250th offerings. And anytime we have new initiatives, even things like how do virtual audio guides work with student groups that are visiting in different ages. And so we'll send those resources, development ideas, sketches of spaces that are utilized for students, sketches of some of the early designs for that to our advisory group and meet with them a couple of times a year. We understand that financial resources and teachers' times are also important because they will have had long days. So we do offer like a stipend and actually like tax form information and have a charter for that, and have teachers send us resources and give us actual like written and verbal feedback on those ideas. And make sure we have a nice mixture of like representation of grade level. Because we can often focus like on like 3 or 4 ranges for grade level and funnel all of our resources into that, but different ages and developmental stages need different ways to have that content shaped and formed. And even things like if we're producing online content or in-person content, giving teachers opportunities to see the work we're doing and give us feedback on different stuff that didn't make sense.
That is 100% what I had in mind. Thank you. And also I was like, we don't have that. So I'm so glad that you're describing that. Other examples, other experiences.
This is in my old organization, the American Philosophical Society. Research Library Archive had plenty of fellowships. By the end of my tenure there, we had started funneling some teachers that were at our workshops into some of the fellowships. So instead of just funneling and channeling teachers into one silo, expanding that through the whole organization to make them into actual rigorous fellowships that are usually for scholars.
Amazing. That's really cool.
Catherine from the chat says the museum I'm working in has partnered with 2 local schools and they provide free visits to the museum and professional development opportunities.
Amazing. Thank you, Catherine. Sarah.
I can speak for Trisha Patrick, who's online, but I used to work at her organization. That Ford's Theater has a multi-year partnership where we use the framework of oratory and integrating oratory into middle school classrooms as a way to develop a cohort of teacher leaders. Awesome. But it required the organization leadership recognizing it was okay to invest in the same teachers over time, which was required convincing.
Yeah. I love, yes.
I'm Chris Peters from the Hampton History Museum, and we're doing something similar to what was just described. We're working with Hampton City Schools, which for us is really easy because we are also City of Hampton, so they're in the building next door. So we're working with them to develop academic PDs for the teachers to cover specific topics in social studies, and then we provide like resource kits for them. We do that for free, so that's a good relationship for us with the local school system.
This is amazing, exactly what I was hoping for, which is we've got folks on a wide scale, right? Folks that are running programs. Some of you might be hoping and aspiring. A couple of years ago, I fell in the category of everybody, all the cool kids are doing this and we want to do it. And if you're here, great. We have teachers in the room that hopefully want to work with us and think about how to make sure that we're doing a better job to this point of not just being self-serving. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing in New York Historical, and then there's going to be an opportunity for us to think and brainstorm and learn together and from each other. So the program that we've created at New York Historical is called WAMS Teacher Ambassadors. What is WAMS? WAMS is Women in the American Story. It is our digital women's history curriculum. It's an incredibly robust initiative that pulls from not just our own collections, but from collections literally all over the country. It starts in the 1400s, going from pre-contact all the way through 2001. There's over, I think we're getting close to about 600 individual resources. Each of those resources is either a primary source or a biography. There's materials for teachers, there's vocabulary, there's suggested activities, there's discussion pieces. This is not, if you want to see that website, I can send it. I should have put at least a link on here, but I'll share that at some point. But it is a passion project for us, as well as a really important part of what we do. New York Historical is committed to increasing awareness around women's history generally. So we started this WAMS project and we created WAMS Teacher Ambassadors. This is a nice, very succinct sentence that I put up on the screen, but essentially our program is a paid teacher training program where teachers undergo a cohort-based professional development. It is virtual so that we can work with teachers literally from all over the country. We have had teachers actually from outside the country in Canada and Hawaii and the West Coast and East Coast. They meet over the course of 10 hours spaced out over the spring to undergo training. And in exchange for that, they then become ambassadors in their community, leading professional development in their own communities to help spread the word, not just about our materials, but about the importance of women's history. And I would argue now in the climate that we're in now, even just thinking about inclusive and more diverse and more authentic and accurate history. So this is the program we've created. Again, closer to the end, I'll be talking about how this program actually works. But what I wanted to do is share a little bit of behind the curtain, if you will, of how we can develop this and some of the best practices that we use. So full transparency, we 100% started from the selfish perspective. We have come a long way, and I certainly don't talk about it that way anymore because that's not a good way to think about it, but I truly don't think of it that way anymore. But truly, our story started with, we invested an incredible amount of money for our organization into creating this RAMS website. And suddenly we were feeling that pressure from our funders and from our board of, you got to get this in the hands of teachers all over the country because we just spent $500,000 on this initiative and you still want more money to continue doing it. And that was a lot of pressure. And we started doing that work by getting a $20,000 grant from Library of Congress, Teaching with Primary Sources, TPS is great. It gave us a grant for a program we were calling Lambs on the Road. And we were going to go around the country and deliver on-the-ground professional development in school districts around the country. I went to Portland, Oregon in November of 2019. And then 2020 hit, which I know is a very common story for all of us. And so then we thought, okay, so now we have to get this in the hands of teachers all over the country during a global pandemic. We thought, well, we'll wait. And we waited and we waited and we waited. And by about October of 2020, we started to wonder if we would ever get on airplanes again. And we started to also feel the pressure of we probably should spend this grant. There's a finite amount of time the Library of Congress will let us sit and wait. And I called them and I said, if I create something that is COVID friendly, can I spend the money? And they said, yes. And we thought, well, Zoom, we're already paying for, so Zoom is free. We have about $18,000 left, minus the money we spent in Oregon. What do we do with the money? What if we paid teachers to do something for us? And again, this is all selfish, right? We're going to pay teachers to go do something for us. And then on top of that, things started to get even more complicated because the world started to change rapidly. And suddenly the idea that we were well equipped to go into school districts and tell them how to do this work felt a lot less certain. We knew that we knew really great best practices, but the stories that we were hearing from the teachers already in our network where things are changing. I mean, this is not even where we are now. Imagine the conversation now, right? But even in 2020, there are only certain things I can talk about. I'm back in my school. I'm online. I'm doing a weird hybrid thing where I don't really know who my students are. I'm in a bubble. I'm in a pod. I'm not doing social studies anymore because now we're just teaching math and English. It was so complicated. And we started to realize that we needed help in doing this process. And so what we did is we sat down and we thought, okay, teachers are in crisis. We are in crisis. We selfishly want to accomplish something. We're not trying to be selfish because ultimately the goal is to help people do better around women's history. So how do we get our ducks in a row? And we came up with a list of best practices. When we design a program, what must we do? It needs to be mission aligned. And this is a message I get from my development officer at least once a week. Do not create something new that I have to raise money for. So it better somehow fit what you're already doing. Great. It needs to excite our core funding base. Again, I mean, in this same vein, I think we all feel this pressure. If you're going to create something expensive, it better be something that is sustainable financially. And then these are other things that sort of reflect who we are. We wanted it to be authentic and inclusive. We wanted to make sure that the history was rigorous. We wanted to make sure there were lots of conversations around when we put so much work into this curriculum, how do we make sure they do it the way we want them to do? Was sort of the original conversation. Again, this is full odds. I would never say these things now. I learned a lot. But we were really worried about it. We spent years making this. What are we going to do? At the same time, we have incredible respect for classroom teachers. And so we kept saying over and over again, we want to treat them as the professionals that they are, as the experts. They know how to do this. They know how to do that. We need. We recognize we needed to create something that would be flexible or in a pandemic or online or virtual. And even without all those things, it's hard enough to be a teacher. So how do we create something that respects that? How are we clear in our expectations and goals again, so that we're setting everybody up for success, so teachers know what they're signing on to? And then financial compensation was a huge part of that. But we also wanted to think about compensation beyond that. What are teachers getting out of this? So we went around and around and around in these conversations, and this might be obvious, but someone actually already said it this morning. What we came out down to was that the number one most important thing that we had to do was create something that was a win for everybody. You know, this idea of lifting all boats. There was no point in creating a program. It was just about us. If we went into this and said, we need you to take this curriculum, we're going to pay you this money, and all you have to do is go in and deliver the thing, that was not going to be effective for anyone. And the other thing we realized was that the more we thought about it, the more we were asking teachers to do things that they weren't necessarily prepared to do. They were enthusiastic about it and excited about it, but in talking to the teachers that we already knew, and talking to some colleagues that we knew at Teachers College, we started to really process that, you know, you don't necessarily learn how to learn the professional development when you get a degree in education. You don't necessarily have to see you don't necessarily learn or have the opportunity to do that in school. If you're an excellent teacher, there are lots of opportunities presented to you in your school, but that might not be any of them. You also might not be trained in how to write a lesson plan that somebody else is going to use because you're so good at writing them for yourselves. And that was the moment where we thought, oh, we're so worried about treating them as professionals that we're not stopping to think about the fact that actually everybody benefits from training. And it doesn't mean that we are throwing our weight around or saying that we are experts in this. If we say, hey, we know a lot about inquiry-based pedagogy that maybe you don't know, or hey, we're really experienced in leading teacher professional development, and maybe that's not something that you've ever gotten the opportunity to do before. And so at the end of the day, what we did was we realized that we needed to reframe the way we thought about this. And so in fact, I'm probably the only person on my staff that thinks about this program as a teacher leader program. I'm the one that uses that term because that's what funders want to hear, and that's what the partners want to hear, and that's what our peer organizations understand. But my team, this is housed in our professional development work, and they see it as just part and parcel of what they do, with the added benefit that the teachers get paid and get to go off and do really cool and exciting things on behalf of the institution at the end of it. So it's all part of one big thing. In fact, the number of times I have to call my head of professional development and say, I need you to siphon those numbers out. I'm very proud that you've trained all these teachers, but like, what about our ambassador teachers? Because she really thinks of it as all one core thing. And then this one, I put duh at the end because, again, I don't know why it took us this long to come up with this, but we realized, well, we just need to backwards design this. Again, the same way we do all of our professional development, we need to start with what are we hoping to get out of this? And then what do we need to build? As opposed to running around crazy, just going, we just need this in more places around the country. That's not going to solve anything. It's not going to benefit anyone. It's not going to benefit us. It's certainly not going to benefit the teachers. And that's how we ended up mapping out this program in the way that we did. And what I want to give all of you an opportunity to do is, before I tell you what our program looks like, I want to give you all a chance to sort of follow the process that we did and think about how this might make sense for all of you. So what I want to do is, in a moment, I'm going to break you up into some groups. And you're going to be, if the math works out, in one of those three categories that I named before. So you're going to either be sitting with other museum educator, museum type folk. You're going to be sitting with other classroom teachers. You're going to be sitting with other categories, other faculty members, consultants, scholars, etc. And what I want you to do is to start thinking about this idea of, again, backwards mapping what are the goals, and talk about from your vantage point. What is, and I've used our and we because that's how we did our exercise at N-YHS, but talk about what is your mission. So, I mean, that's a good opportunity to introduce yourself, talk about what is it that you do, whether it's what do you teach every day or what you do in your institution. What is your charge? If you're historical, we are charged with getting our resources into as many classrooms as possible and educating as many students and teachers in American history as possible. That's our mission. Then I want you to talk about what are some of the needs. You all are here for a teacher leader session, so I imagine you're coming with very real needs, whether it's around the 250th, for materials, for lesson plans, or online content, what have you. What are those needs? Why do we even get ourselves into these conversations? And as teachers, what are your needs? Why is it that you come to museums? What drives that partnership? Then I want you to think about what can you bring to the table? What are the strengths? What are the skills? What are the competencies? What are the resources? What are the funds that you have that you can offer to a potential leadership program? And then what are the non-negotiables? What are the things that are just, I am not, this has to happen in order. Like, so for us in New York Historical, we've made a commitment that if we don't have funding in a given year, we won't run it because we're not asking teachers to do this for free. Like, that's a bottom line, non-negotiable for us. For teachers, it may be, I can only commit this amount, or I'm not going to travel somewhere to do this, it needs to be virtual. I mean, you all know better than I in many ways. So let's do this. We're gonna do this side of the room over here will be museum people, practitioners. In the middle, either maybe we'll do at the front table, teachers. And then,
Those are one suggestions for folks that are working on as part of commissions.
yes, oh, yes. And do we have commission? How many commissions? Well, do we have? Because I wonder if that should be its own. Great. Okay, so I'm gonna change my, thank you, Mark, change my directions. Museums here. Commissions here. I'll keep teachers here. And then in the back corner, if you're sort of other, none of the above, you can sit over there. And I'm going to ask you to brainstorm, discuss these questions. You can take notes. We'll do a share out in about 15 minutes or so, based on these 4 questions. I'm loath to do it because some of the things are being said at the end. It always, the brilliance starts to come at the very end. I'm going to ask you now to take just 15 seconds to identify 2 people. One person is going to be in charge of just standing holding the chart. So that might be the easy job. I'm going to volunteer now for that. And then another person who's willing to share out. You do not need to, you did this for 20 minutes. You do not need to now tell us everything you talked about in 20 minutes. Please, we'll, that'll be it. That will be the end of our session. But if one person feels comfortable just throwing out some of the best nuggets, if you will, from the conversation, and you don't need to stick to the script. So at this point, we're synthesizing, right? Synthesizing to key takeaways. And then once we do that, we'll get into a conversation where there might be questions and things like that. So I think we'll start with what are key takeaways. So quick conversation, who's going to hold the chart and who's going to talk. And then our friends on Zoom, there'll be a chance to unmute and also share.
I'll hold the chart.
I would love that. I would. So what's I know.
Well, yeah, I think actually.
I lost. I don't know your name.
The one without a name tag.
Dan was so eager that he just stood up. So great. Dan, you used to go first. So take it away. And you are museum educators, right?
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Okay, high level takeaways. Let's see if I can reread my handwriting. So I didn't put mission down here because it just varies so much by organization that we represent, but we also realize that there are departmental missions within education and organizational missions. So thinking about what those are and how they fit together is an important thing. In terms of need, it's a lot of demonstrating, but also on our own ends, updating old narratives about history and how that history happens and how that history is produced and what we view as history today. And doing a lot of that through co-working and collaboration with teachers directly, creating positive or negative feedback loops based on our professional development or resources, and testing audiences as teachers and using teachers as test audiences for whatever we might have. Invites to the teacher and admin table, and developing trust is a major need. If the school district doesn't believe that you need to be there, you won't be there. How do you build that trust, and what is that need there? But also the really fun needs of who's got the time to do this and who has the marketing money to spend on these types of things. So the real kind of hardtack needs are there as well. In terms of what we're bringing professional development resources, primary resources. We're bringing our own time, and we're giving teachers a creative outlet in some senses to make sure that they have the ability to develop these things and have that moment to pause, breathe, and big picture thoughts. We're also providing shared experiences and background. It's not often that teachers from different schools or different school districts come together. And providing that opportunity is an important thing. Also, we often undersell the place-based learning aspects. I work at a museum that has historic ships. You don't get to step onto a historic ship every day. How do you communicate that? How do you communicate stepping into a museum or into your grounds or into your archive to teachers as a really unique and special experience? Then there's also the opportunity to bring leverage for funding to school districts. So what money can they get by working with you instead of what money do you have that you need to spend on them? Other types of funding structures. Non-negotiables, everything is either you pay them or it is free for them to do. We're not charging teachers to do these things, or if we do, we reimburse them or make sure there's a stipend attached to it as best as possible. Make sure that you aren't just ticking off a box of like, oh, Monticello does teacher professional development. I have to do that. Check. What is your organization's why, and make sure that you're not just checking off that box. And then making sure that you provide professional development credits for the teachers themselves and make it count for them. Teachers can check off boxes by attending your workshops, but make sure you're not checking off boxes by comparing yourself to other organizations.
Why don't we move over to our other museum? Educator table.
So our thinking wound up not being as organized with the four things. We sort of talked in the round a lot of it. But the two biggest takeaways that I wanted to share out were that we sort of all collectively agreed that start with the buy-in is so important from the institution to the teachers and vice versa. Make sure that everybody's on the same page, make sure everybody's happy with the relationship, because it's then only going to blossom from there. And if that's your starting point and working with them, you're going to make sure that you're creating content and PD that is valuable to those teachers, but in turn, then the teachers are invested in that site and in what they've created, and then hopefully will then disseminate that through the rest of their channels. The other item we talked about sort of stemmed from the fact that a lot of sites have very limited staff to devote to these things. Oftentimes one education person who is doing a lot of other things as well. So how best to not be overwhelmed by this kind of monumental ask? And the biggest thing we sort of found was that small thinking is not bad. It's okay to think small. It's okay to think about one subject, one competency, one or two standards, if that's what gets your foot in the door. Conversations about how do you create something maybe that is outreach. So if you are one staff person, you can create something that then you just sort of send out into the world and see what comes back. And that's a great way to start building those connections if you're starting from scratch. That was the basis.
We work our way around there and start 250.
Just a quick request, would you all mind going, sort of.
Oh, sorry.
I just realized that I was looking at the Zoom, like, oh, you can't see you. You were like, it doesn't bother me. Sorry, Zoom folks.
From the A250th Commission perspective, I think we all felt like that for each of our states, in each commission, there's going to need to be a balance between celebratory and reflective that we need to work on. And I guess one way to summarize this, I keep going back to my phrase, is when are we us is a good thing that we've been talking about nationally and in North Carolina and across the country as we think about states who are not part of the original 13 or next to them, or on a hemispheric level where things were actually happening. How do we get that buy-in and connection? And for all people who may not feel a connection to their land when it was in revolutionary times, when do they feel like they're part of this country and why? And what is that legacy from the revolution, especially in regards to freedom and liberty and what those things mean? That was a big mission we have. We also, the lesser known stories, we feel like is a very important way to get at some of this reflection that we're looking for. We do feel like we need more support from legislators and fellow staff, other educators, marketing on a national level. We all feel like there's so much excitement among so many people, but then there's this void. And then I just feel like a lot of people are going to wake up in July 2026 and say, hey, what am I doing today? You know, and we all know there's a lot of work to be done between now and then. That's why marketing on a national level that we could all connect to and maybe make it more manifest would be great. And so we want the diverse stories. We want not just buy-in, but participation from everybody in the communities as we look around our commissions and we realize that we need to get voices in from the beginning and not ask for rubber stamp at the end from different constituencies. Non-negotiables, as always, people involved with us, educators, if we're talking about teachers, they need to be compensated. Reliable sources, reliable history that we're sharing, that is non-negotiable. Teacher voice in the programming, teacher directed, and we talked about really good ideas, student planning, like maybe having students try things out for us. Culture responsive research, we don't want harm to be done, so we have to help educators to make sure they understand everything that they're sharing. It's a lot more.
Our teacher group.
So apparently I am the teacher in this year, so I'm gonna, I am the teacher. So our needs and our mission, our needs is that we teachers need to gain background knowledge on the subjects. Like you all know the content, and we have to know all the content for science, social studies, math. So we need more background knowledge of what to teach and how to teach that. We need and want to develop these partnerships with all of you to help us with field trips, to help us with student involvement, help us with primary sources, ideas, things like that. And then tangible things to take back in the classroom. Like we don't have that time to go do all that research on all of these websites. You all have like great websites and great resources online, but we need something that we can easily take back and use in the classroom right away. What we can bring in the table of things that actually work in the classroom. You guys get a great idea of things that are great and that I'm like, oh, this is a great 3-day lesson. This would be wonderful. I have 20 minutes today to teach social studies. So what actually works for us, we can tell you that. There's also really, there's a lot of considerations. We have our L's, those are our English language learners, our special needs students, the time constraints that we actually have, social emotional learning, which is really big in schools right now. And then the SOLs, what the SOLs are really on paper, but what we actually either have time to teach or what's actually on the test is different. And then we also bring personal commitment energy. Like we love our kids, we love what we do, and we have a passion for it. So we can bring that to the table as well. Non-negotiables time. It was a lot of work to get me here today and out of the classroom. So making things worth our time, like sitting through a long day PD and not taking anything back with us is really difficult. So making sure it's manageable in our time. And then compensation. Yes, money is awesome, but it doesn't always have to be money. Like we love resources too, things that we can take back with our kids. Credits or certification points is also awesome for us too. So thank you for being
And finally, our everybody else, our
leftovers.
faculty and all wonderful stories.
We're all.
Yeah. We totally did not actually.
So we have two sections. We're going to talk about my section and my colleague right here to talk about grow your own program and then how to train your own leaders. So at Kansas State University, where I'm an instructor at, we have a new Indigenous Education Leadership Graduate Certificate Program where we train people how to be leaders in Indian country, Indian education, because what we're finding is a lot of individuals in these capacities had to learn their job on the fly. So I'm sure that's where you can apply it to anywhere, right? So we teach them how to read tribal sovereignty, what that means, how to do nation-to-nation building, what that means. So we have our second cohort finishing up, so we're looking for our third cohort, and we're looking for 12 students, how to train them to work in Indian Ed. So that's what we're doing at K-State.
And through my work with University of Massachusetts Lowell, we work with Lowell High School that we have an education pathway at high school to grow students of color and into hopefully graduate or teaching positions and funnel them into the university. And so collaborating with museums and those students in the Grow Your Own program, and how can we entice them into that informal learning.
And then that, we sort of segued into this idea that, like, especially things like travel sovereignty, that's a super nuanced, and later, Kelly teaches in the program, he's like, I wouldn't teach that class. I don't feel qualified. So we're thinking about, like, there are those kinds of things that really, they require some, knowledge and training, but maybe people don't necessarily immediately want to jump into a graduate program, whether that's like a full degree program or even a 12 credit certificate, because of the expense and time commitment and, all of the above. So we did think a little bit about micro learning, badging and credentialing, and think about how those two could work together, how to maybe unbundle some of that to give people an introduction to common language in a particular area, and then think about potentially moving into a graduate program if they want to go deeper. And then the conversation talked a little bit about, hey, we provide lots of teacher professional development. We've got these great programs, but teachers might really value that idea of a credential in partnership with the university. So like that credit's coming from a university, and maybe multiple museums, historic sites are coming together to offer through. So that was beginnings of a conversation. We get, no answers yet, but I can tell you now, I will be at the Birds of a Feather session next door during lunch. If you want to talk about badging and credentialing, come by. Commercial play, sorry.
Awesome, thank you so much. And then finally, I want to acknowledge our colleagues on Zoom. I see maybe there might be some things in the chat because I see the number going up. But also, if anyone wants to feels comfortable unmuting, we should theoretically be able to hear you. No pressure, but would love to hear from our virtual colleagues.
I can give it a go. We covered a lot of ground in a very short amount of time. But I think the kind of biggest takeaways, both around what we need and what we bring to the table, is that
we have
One second,
One quick second.
up your volume. Like, no matter how hard I hit that button, it won't go up. You'll stand closer to the computer.
I do that too.
Can you try one more time?
okay, can you hear me now?
Still very quiet.
Put the captioning on.
I mean, I can turn on my New Jersey voice and be louder if that's helpful.
It would have to be really loud. Bear with me one more second. Sorry, guys.
Sam, if it's any consolation, I can hear you loud and clear at home.
We can read it now.
It's very small.
Can we, Mark, can we mute that one and use one of these laptops? It might be louder than one.
Oh, that's a. Yeah, let's try that. Let's mute ourselves here.
I can.
Mark, I see you holding a computer, but you're all muted, so I can't tell if you all are telling me to start now. I'm going to take that as a thumbs up. Someone flag me down if I should stop talking. So our big takeaways related both to what we need, but also what we bring to the table. A lot of us really just talked about having pretty small teams and a lot of limitations, around funding and things like that. But essentially, we really got at, like, everything we do needs to be interdisciplinary. It's always got to come back to our mission, but we know that social studies, isn't always afforded the most time when it comes to classroom instruction. So we're thinking about, how are we creating both programs, but also resources that could work in an ELA setting or a fine arts setting, or, other topics outside of social studies, but of course still come back to our mission and the core, history that our specific institutions need to contribute, just again, to get funding and things like that. And our non-negotiables, similar to what Leslie said at the beginning, but we don't ask folks mostly across the board to do anything that we can't compensate them for. I hope that worked and that you heard me. If not, I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Tim. I was saying thank you, but I was muted. Yes, we got it. So for the sake of time, I want to move us forward. I wish we had all the time in the world. I mean, I will be honest. Part of my thinking here was, you know, we could all sit together in a room and dream up the perfect program, but that's not necessarily going to serve you anyway back in your institution. So part of it was I wanted to at least start this piece. So in the hopes that you can take what you've been hearing from your colleagues and take it to your institution and start to fit it. I wanted to follow up on just a few things that I heard as perhaps a caveat or laying the groundwork to share you at least what our program looks like as a starting point. Absolutely, these restrictions, and Sam teed me up great for this in terms of thinking about time and money and size and scale. Nobody is asking any institution to do something beyond their means. And I will say, from my personal experience, on one hand, I recognize, I mean, I come from a very privileged position of working for a quite large education division. In fact, our museum isn't that big, but our education division is very big, and I feel very lucky about that. But even for me, I was brought on as the first ever professional development specialist almost 10 years ago, and was told one of our goals is to create a teacher leader program. I think at the time they were thinking about an advisory board, and it took us 7 years to get there. You know, so yes, schools are in crisis, teachers need us, but we also need to do things responsibly and figure out what the right strategy is for. And I always want to acknowledge that no one is expecting anyone to do something above and beyond. I loved what this group was talking about. I love this. It was small thinking is not bad. I love that. It's 100% right. You think about economies of scale, right? You know, given the size of your organization, what can the impact be? I also saw this table has this great sidebar thing and this concern about competing with ourselves. And I think one of the goals is if we're not all trying to take over the world, we're not competing with ourselves. And it's not just a regional thing. It's an acknowledgement that there are always going to be more teachers than we can ever serve. And so, yes, like my board has trained me to say things like, we have national reach, and we do. We know we don't serve every teacher. We know that our materials aren't in every classroom. And also we, in our training, we try to introduce our teachers to all of the fabulous resources that are represented here, because it's not self-promotion. It's about what we're all trying to collectively do. And I think that's a really hard message to sell. I've been in so many meetings, it seems particularly every time I'm here, talking in these collaborative environments. We all do that dance of having to represent ourselves and our institutions, but also do the collective good. But even if it's just for our own teams, thinking about, you know, we can do what we can do and have control over that. And that's a nice fulfilling piece. I also wanted to acknowledge these two tables that I think we think in the binary of there's museums and there's teachers and they work together. I think not forgetting that there are fantastic outside partners. For us, we bring in scholars, we bring in other experts of different kinds into our program. So not forgetting that this is not a one-to-one match and people can help with that. And then I apologize, I don't remember who said it, but not buy-in, but participation. I think that came from the 250th table. But I think that speaks to everything that we are all trying to do. And certainly I might steal that for myself in the way we talk about things, which is it's great to have teachers love us and be our groupies, and everybody feels really good about that. But participation is the thing that actually will leverage and impact. So I want to take just a few moments to tell you about our program in brief. And then I'm going to end by letting you hear from one of our teachers. And then we'll have just a few minutes for questions before lunch. And then we go up to lunch and maybe the conversation will continue. I was worried that nobody would show up and then we wouldn't have any charts to show. I made my own charts, but you all said all the things I was going to say. So great. So it also feels very reassuring. Like, oh no, we're not alone. So what does our program look like? So we did this exercise and then we started thinking about, okay, for real, what can we offer? We started there more so than what can we ask them to do? What can we bring to the table in response to what we heard from the teachers that we had conversations with early on. So we pay them, we've talked a lot about that. For us, it's a $1,500 stipend. We do an additional $200, and that amount varies, but it's about approximately of additional stuff. And one of our teachers was so excited when she got her box that she took a picture of the stuff in the box. And it's like my new favorite thing, because I would never think to do that. But we give them books related to the time period they're studying. And then the swag, they get a notebook, they get a mug, they get a jacket. The number of teachers that have told me they would do this just for the jacket alone, and I tell them I will pay them for it. But that sense of belonging cannot be overstated. And you'll notice I have some of the teachers every year we say, can you send us a picture of yourself to help with our promotion? And they all send us a picture in their chat. But we give them, and the research materials, again, sort of grounding it, a reminder for us and for them, this is grounded in history. We do, as I said earlier, 10 hours of training. So we do it synchronous on Zoom in 2-hour blocks throughout the spring. I'll talk about what that training looks like in a moment. And then there's one-on-one coaching and feedback, which literally means that we are available when a teacher comes calling. So whether they email us or they call us or they reach out for help at any point, and then even long after they're out of the program, we make ourselves available as much as possible. And there's a mutual understanding. They are busy and we are busy. We might not get back to them right away, but it's that sense of support that we want to create. We also have an alumni network so that once a teacher goes through the program, they get connected to their other peers and they can keep in touch. And we do that mostly through a monthly newsletter, which is literally my colleague putting a few things into an email and sending it out. Nothing, again, thinking about time and resources. Monthly newsletter sounds really fancy and it looks really fancy if you put it in MailChimp, so we'll graphic design it for you. The training program itself, as I said, it's synchronous. We recruit 20 teachers each year for our program, funding pending. So we scale up and down depending on how much money we are able to secure in a given year. That group of 20 gets broken into cohorts, and each cohort they self-selected. So we pick teachers based on what cohort they're going to go into, and they're content-based cohorts. So there's elementary, middle, and high school teachers broken up in those cohorts. And we do that because, again, what we heard from our own teacher, what we heard from our teachers is they want the content. They love talking in grade bands, and we do grade band work, but actually the thing they most want is to be grown-ups for a second and talk on an adult level, read some really awesome history, talk about the history. So that's their breakout. We bring in scholars. We do a whole session. It's sort of awkward because I am one of the curriculum developers, so it sounds very fancy, but the teachers think it's great because they're using this website and then they get to talk to the creators of the curriculum content. And they're like, how did you make this? What did you do? Why did you choose this source? And in the same way, I learned a ton from that informal conversation about what's missing, and what teachers need, and what's not there. So again, there's that mutually beneficial relationship. We do a deep dive into museum education pedagogy. We talk about inquiry-based, we model inquiry, we give them chances to lead inquiry with each other. We understand that while we are not classroom teachers, we actually do bring a lot to the table in terms of our knowledge of pedagogy. And that bringing that to teachers is not insulting their own practice, but acknowledging places that the gaps they may have or the areas where they have their own challenges. And then we get into the meat of how do you lead a PD? How do you actually do that? We give them example outlines, example slides. And then at the end of all of this, we say, we trained you in all of this, but at the same time, you should feel empowered to make this work for you. So again, hearing from our teacher group, there's a limitation to what the reality is. And so we say, we've given you a lot of nuts and bolts and scaffolding, but we're not going to be looking over your shoulder as you do this. You don't have to stick to a script. There's no messaging. We are not, I don't like using this word, it's so repeated now. We're not indoctrinating anyone into the way New York Historical teaches this. We're adding tools to your toolbox. And what happens when you go back to your community is going to be great no matter what, because we're trying to empower you. And then again, that one-on-one support and feedback. So we give teachers the opportunity to share their slides, to share their lesson plans, to share their ideas, all building up to what they are going to do for us. So what we decided to do, given the limitation of time that teachers have, that first bullet is really the only thing that we ask teachers to do, which is they go through all of the stuff I just talked about, and on the other end, they lead at least 2 workshops in their community. That might be sitting with their social studies team in their school. It might mean a department meeting, a full school meeting, a regional conference, a district conference, a state conference. If they're really ambitious, maybe they want to try to go to NCSS or NCHE. Most of them do that as a stretch goal after they come out of the program. We charge them with a goal, a stretch goal, of trying to reach 30 peers. We have teachers, we have a teacher who actually does teach in Indian country in Oklahoma. And for her, she was like, I'm not going to grow to scale because I'm part of a small community, but my impact is large. Great. No shame if you're teaching 10 other peers. Then I've got teachers that come from massive districts and are like, yeah, I'm going to go do all of Baltimore County and I'm going to reach 100 people at my district PD. Also great. There's no shame. We set that number just to like gauge expectations, but you do what you gotta do. The feedback and curriculum materials, I say as needed. One of the things we realized is just like above and beyond, like asking people to come to the focus group, asking them to do this, that, the other thing. I think that's a separate program for us. Like, again, I think thinking about what are the expectations within this program and keeping it focused, keeping those expectations clear. Honestly, I get more out of those one-on-one conversations with teachers and other things. There's a time and a place to do that, and we don't make it a formal part of our program. Similarly, these last 2 bullet points, I think given the very nerdy teachers we recruit, they're going to be enthusiasts no matter what, but it's certainly a win for us. And then we always ask them to help spread the word for recruitment. But again, it's not an official ask. When they sign an agreement with us, honestly, we have to do it so that our finance department will cut them a check. The only thing that we ask of them is that credibility. Everything else is the cherry on top that we get as a bonus for being in this program. This is what the cycle looks like. So it's almost a year long. We're in recruitment now. We do selection in January. We do interviews because we love getting to know the teachers. Honestly, it's really important to us because it's cohort based. We want to make sure everybody will agree to our norms. That we do no harm, that we put teachers in a comfortable environment. So we selectively do interviews. Training runs from February to April, and then from April to September. And then again, even if they can't meet in September, it's a soft deadline. But as far as our funders are concerned, they have from April to September to use their workshops. The program has been so successful that we have just now launched this past year an official alumni network. We also had enough teachers to feel like there was an alumni network. And that alumni network is everything from sending out those newsletters. We invite alumni to come to one of the synchronous trainings to meet their new peers and to talk about their experiences of leading professional development. And then again, as we have it, and I don't want to make it seem like we have unlimited funds because we really don't. But as we have pockets of money, we will also offer things like scholarships to our teachers and stipends. So what you're looking at in the middle, for example, was I had money through an N-YHS grant to take a teacher with me to Salt Lake City to the NCHE conference, and we recruited one of our WAMS ambassadors, and we couldn't, bless her heart, we didn't have enough money to pay for Jamila's entire flight and everything, but we covered her conference registration and gave her $300. And she said, you know what? I'll figure out the rest of the money. And she put together through some mini grants in her own community. On the right is a group of teachers that came together at NCSS. That was the start of the alumni network. We literally had no money. We told the teachers we had no money. And we just said, we want to keep you all together. So we're building this mailing list. And by the way, we're going to be in NCSS. And they put in a proposal and they were accepted. And all 4 of them found a way to get themselves there. And it was amazing. And we felt really guilty. We had no money to offer, but they were like, we just want to come and have this experience. And it was actually the first time any of the 5 of us had met in person because everything was virtual. And since then, has inspired us to ask for money from funders to pay. So we actually are paying for about 4 teachers to go to NCSS this year from the alumni pool. But what I like about the alumni network when we talk about scale is it exists no matter what. And the teachers have said over and over that even if you never pay for anything again, we want to stay in touch online. So what does this mean for us? Over the last 3 years, we've trained 55 ambassadors. So there was a year where we didn't have enough money and we did 15 instead of 20. We've recruited from 24 states and Canadian. The scale and impact, so thinking about why do this from the selfish perspective, those 55 teachers have trained over 1,700 of their peers, and that's just in the program alone. So that's not counting the 4 teachers that went to NCSS, does not count that. This is just within their required, quote unquote, required 2 workshops alone. While we can't map directly, we have seen our own website traffic grow substantially, and it cannot be a coincidence. Clearly, something is happening with this grassroots approach. We ourselves have received invaluable feedback on the materials, again, through no formal part of the program. We just have continued to build this wonderful, fantastic network of teachers that are alumni that are involved. And so by really, this sounds all very grand, but what I'm telling you, the reality is it's a spring series of trainings and then asking teachers to go to workshops. Like when you boil it down to that very core essence, it suddenly starts to feel very doable, even though you get to say all of these other flowery things like this. So the last thing I wanted to do is end, I loved the comment about it's really hard for teachers to come out and do this. And so even though our alums are so passionate, everyone was like, I don't think I can make it to Williamsburg in time to do this. And so no one was able to join me. But Amanda sent this wonderful video that I want to share so you can hear directly why it's worthwhile to do this work from the teacher's perspective. Oh, yes. It's gonna blow everyone's minds. Good call. This is all the way up. This is like all the way up. So we'll see. Hopefully, I don't blast the because I do this. Now Amanda's going to introduce herself. So we'll learn a little bit about her from this 90-second video.
Hi, I'm Amanda Burchell, and this is my 18th year teaching political science at Lebanon High School in the rural Ozarks of Missouri. Being a Williams ambassador has been one of the professional learning highlights of my career as a teacher. Been deeply appreciative of the depth of learning and care shown to me as a professional by the Williams staff. I cannot say enough about how well they treat us and how much they want us to succeed in our classrooms. Not only was the learning free, but they also provided a stipend and resources to me. This is a far cry from the typical pay-to-learn model of professional learning for educators. Being a Williams ambassador opened up a world of learning for me about all the marvelous resources available from the New York Historical Society. It's challenged me to find more ways to incorporate women's history into my classroom and present a more inclusive story of America. It's also prompted me to propose a new American women's history course at my school. Fingers crossed that I'll get to teach that next year. To those of you watching who have the power to create similar programs, please do. As a teacher in a poor rural area, programs like Williams Ambassadors are invaluable. So often I see opportunities for my colleagues in urban areas or that require large amounts of funding. This program was accessible to me and has already changed the lives of my students. We have all learned to be better online collaborators and learners, and I hope more institutions will be able to capitalize on these opportunities, making this learning accessible to a more diverse cohort of educators. Thank you for considering expanding your reach as well as we all try to improve student learning. Thank you.
I do want to say that I didn't cherry pick Amanda. I sent out a huge email and she was the one teacher that had time. She's like, oh, prep period, I'll do it. But Amanda is an example. I mean, we talk about where teaching is really, really hard right now. Every time I have the opportunity to get on the phone with her, she tells me something that just hurts my soul about the way things are being restricted. And of course, she talked about economics as a part of her piece. But I think those of us that are feeling pressure to do something because of the way the world is, and those of us that are feeling pressure about how do we support teachers in places where what they can talk about is just shrinking, programs like this are particularly valuable to them, and they work. And I think part of it is that it works because we give her all of the tools and resources, and then she's allowed to do whatever she wants with them. We don't ask anything specific of her so that she can model it her own way. And I really hope she gets one of this history course. So I will also say my colleague knew I was presenting this morning and texted me and said that another one of our Williams ambassadors, not Amanda, but did get permission to do a women's history course first in her, I think she's in Kansas. So victory for Mary, who's another one of our teachers. So I'm just about out of time. I want to close by saying thank you so much. I will put my email address up on the screen, go back to my slides. Always eager, as you can probably tell, to talk about this topic. I'll be around at lunch. And if anyone has any final questions, also, if you want, I have flyers if you just want to get our link and learn more about our program. And thank you again, everyone.